We're good to go. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Finance Committee meeting of August 22nd, 2024. And is our pattern, we'd like to read the land acknowledgement at this time. The Niagara region and Grimsby are situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattaway-Wendourong, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The Regional Municipality of Niagara and the Town of Grimsby stand with all Indigenous peoples, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. Moving on to item 3 on our agenda is to ask if there are any disclosures of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests from our committee members. If there are, please raise your hand. I see none. Then we will move on to item 4, which is the approval of the agenda. The agenda has been circulated. Does anybody or anyone have any amendments to the agenda? And then failing that, if I could have a mover and a seconder. Member Scandinavo.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just curious if we could add in other business just a quick update on the timing of the reports. That would be helpful, like that we discussed at the last meeting.
Is everyone else in agreement with that? At the last meeting, we had talked about the timing of the release of the reports to the Finance Committee, so we'll just have a follow-up on that. I see no objections, so we will add that as the item under, we don't really have business arising, but other business. Under other business, okay, we'll put it at the end then under other business. That would be just fine. Then if I could have a mover and seconder to approve that. Councillor Howe has moved his approval. Councillor Vardy has seconded that. All those in favor of the agenda as amended? And that is passed. The next item is item number 5, which is the receipt of previous minutes. We have the minutes before us tonight of the Finance Committee of June 27th, 2024, and the Grimsby Economic Development Advisory Committee of July 4th, 2024. Any comments or suggestions? Yes. Councillor Kristanji, I was remiss in not welcoming you to our committee as our newest member. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, through Chair. I don't know if I have to lift it or I just wanted to lift 771 report, CAO-24-04, Grimsby Development Industry Liaison Task Force.
Through you, Chair. So Councillor Kristanji wants to lift this. So what we will do is lift items. We have Councillor Kristanji as the mover, just need a seconder to lift item 7.1 from these minutes. And then we'll just call the question on that one.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Vardy is seconding that. Then all those in favor of lifting that item to discuss further, by a show of hands, please. That is carried. Why don't we do that first then? Go ahead, Councillor Kristanji, if you had some questions or comments.
Thank you, through Chair. So I have a little bit, some concerns and just wanted a little bit more information. I think it's great that there is the idea of developing a task force. I just have concerns about transparency and questions if it's going to be open to the public and if it's going to be streamed so that the public has access to see the discussions and see what's going on. I also was wondering if this was just developers and staff. I see that there's Niagara Regional Housing, if residents or council will have representation as a stakeholder on this committee as well. So I don't know if anybody's here to answer questions or.
I'm going to let Katie chime in first and then I'll probably add some comments. Go ahead.
Through you, Chair. So when it comes to the live streaming portion of it, our advisories, apart from, I believe, Heritage and Committee of Adjustment, those are the only ones that get live streamed. And task forces don't typically, it's a lot more informal. As for your other questions, that's something I can definitely take back to our Economic Development Officer. I'm not totally privy to all of that. So, yeah.
And will that provide a timely enough answer for you? Because obviously, our deputy clerk will go back to the Economic Development Officer, Mr. Mealy, with those questions, and then can report back at our next meeting, which would be a month from now.
Thank you, through chair, I'm fine with that.
If that could be so noted in the minutes, then? Then if I could have a mover and seconder to receive the previous minutes, and I'll read the motion. Resolved that the following minutes be received to the Finance Committee of June 27th, 2024, and the Grimsby Economic Development Advisory Committee of July 4th, 2024. A mover, please. Councillor Kristanji, a seconder. Councillor Vardy, and all those in favor of the resolution as read, with a show of hands, please. That is carried. Item number 6 on our agenda is delegations and presentations, and we have none this evening. So we will move on to 2 reports that are consent reports, unless anyone wishes for them to be lifted and to be discussed further. So the 2 consent reports are the biannual procurement report, and then the second one is the tax arrears update. Then I'm going to request they be lifted. I would like to have them discussed, so both of them. In order to do so, I believe, do we need a mover and a seconder?
No,
Okay.
They're sorry, not for the reports.
Then I'm going to ask Mr. Delmonico, our treasurer, to just briefly lead us through Report Finance 24-22, the biannual procurement report. And over to you, Tony.
Yes, thank you. So this is a regular report that's brought to committee every 6 months for information to summarize our procurement activity. The report covers the January to end of June 2024 period. So you'll see that over $16 million in work was procured during this time. Most of that, about $10 million, relates to work for the Peach King Center. We had tender packages 1 and 2 awarded in that window. And overall, there were 44 separate procurements issued during this time. And if you look at page 2, it'll provide a breakdown of those procurement methods as well as the procurement values. And then the remainder of the report provides details related to each issuance.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions about the report? My questions have to do with the Peach King Center. And I guess my first question is really just to make sure we're understanding the columns there. And I'm referring now to page 11. And so there are 2 there, just to use them as examples to make sure we're all understanding this report. I don't profess to have the answers, so I'm going to ask Mr. Delmonico just to explain after I explain my question further. So to use the last example on page 11, which is the Peach King Center expansion, construction management services, and then the awarded vendor is Aquacon, the pre-tax original procurement value, $2.5 million, and then the pre-tax total cumulative increase, which is $10 million, which then equals the next column beside it of $13 million. And then when we see the report later on in our agenda on the Peach King Center, is there any way to tie those amounts to that report or no? Because this is really, this report is about contracts awarded, and the next report on the Peach King Center is cumulative costs to date. But maybe you could just expand upon that for us.
Yeah, if I'll address that second question first. Yeah, so this relates to tender packages 1 and 2, whereas you're right, the memo further on in the agenda relates to a cost to date, which includes tender package 3. The reason it's included in as a contract amendment of such a large value is because the tenders for the Peach King Center were broken up into those 4 different packages. So that 2.5 represents the original tender amount, and then the 10.8 would include would be the amendment for tender package 2, other procurements related to that. So it's the way it was structured, it ends up becoming listed as a contract amendment that way, even though there was really 4 different tenders.
Okay.
Yeah.
Member Scandinavo, go ahead.
I guess now that we lifted the report, I did have a question on that same line item there. So this falls under the category of contract amendment approvals, which says procurement commitments that were previously approved, however, the total cumulative costs have become more than the original contract, and then basically requiring new approvals. So, like, that last line is the amended amount is about 4 times the amount that was initially approved, right? So, and same thing with like 2 lines above the McCallum item, like the increase is about 50% of the original approved value. Like, does that go through a full procurement process again? Like, does it go through the full RFP process again? Or, because like, I mean, you go for, and maybe you can help me understand this, you go for an RFP, you get a contract approval for 2.5 million, right? And then you're amending the contract 4 times the value of the initial contract. Like, does that then require another full RFP process? Like, how do we know we're getting the best bang for our buck on the renewal portion? You know, again, understanding that, you know, the fire truck approval we did last time, you know, that's 99,000 on 1.6 million. That's the item above, right? Makes sense. But when you're amending it 4 times the value, what's sort of the process to undertake it to ensure like value for money?
And Mr. Delmonico, I think maybe that's just the layout of the report as to, I was a bit confused by the same thing too, because I think it's not that it's outside of the budget by that amount, it's just the next step. But perhaps you could just expand upon that and help us understand it.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Related to the last line there, the construction management services, so those were tendered. They were tendered out by Aquacon for those services as the construction manager. So it yes, those were fully tendered. The one related to the McCallum Sather, that for continuity and making sure that we retain the same architect, that was not done through a competitive process because we want to remain with the same architect. That just related to some of the additional work that was needed relating to those parking lot adjustments, the stormwater analysis, which resulted in the need for an additional pond on site. So, so that was not because of for that reason. But those other ones, because it's for each of those 4 tenders, those are competitively tendered for the construction.
Sorry, can I ask a follow-on question? So then are we saying then that Aquacon ran a competitive tender process itself and they're acting just as a conduit of the payment?
Yes, through the chair, yes, Aquacon ran competitive procurement.
And then I think the far column on the right, where it says description, is an important one to read because using the Aquacon row as an example there, it talks about tender package 1, 1.249673, which then I can see on page 3 of the Peach King Center report. Then it talks about tender package 2 of 7.424738, which is also part of then tender package 2 on the Peach King Center report. And so and under general conditions, the $2,008,674. So I can see sort of where that breakdown that's on the far right-hand column is tying into the columns on the Peach King Center report, which we will get to later, but just for everybody's reference, that's Finance Report 24-25. So the two of them obviously go hand in hand. So I guess, are your questions answered on that? Are we, go ahead.
Yep, no, that makes sense. Thanks, Tony, and thank you.
Are there any other questions about this particular report? Okay, I see none. Because I asked to have both of these items, if we could just move to the tax arrears report, or shall we accept them each individually then? Individually. Okay, then we will have the first resolution to wind this topic up. So the first resolution is resolved that the Finance Committee hereby approves.
Sorry, just this one.
Just that one, yes.
Yeah, just A, you can just read A.
Yes, that report, Finance 24-22, the biannual procurement report dated August 22nd, 2024, be received for information. Do I have a mover and a seconder? The mover is Councillor Corstangi, the seconder is Councillor Howe, and all those in favor, by a show of hands, please. And that is carried. So that's the first part. The second part is the tax arrears update, and that's report 24-23. And Mr. Delmonico, if you could just walk us through that, that would be great.
Sure. This report arose out of a discussion from last month's meeting on broader economic factors such as interest rates and tax arrears as an indicator of property owners' sensitivity to those factors. So the Bank of Canada's standard setting rate has begun to come down, and as part of the economic update presentation we received last month, we saw that interest rates were forecasted to continue to trend down for the rest of this year and into next year. However, as people's fixed mortgages come due for renewal, they may be renewing at rates higher than they've been used to seeing. So from a tax arrears perspective, we are seeing outstanding amounts owing continue to trend down, which is obviously a good sign. That figure was down to 4.3% as of the end of 2023. Now, I should note that the taxes levied that you see in the report, that represents all the taxes levied, including for the region and the school boards. That's why that number is in the 70 millions. The outstanding amounts also relate to taxes owing for all levels of government. Now, from a risk perspective, the province considers arrears levels under 10% to pose low financial risk to the municipality. And then you'll see the graph on page 2 of the report shows how we compare to some other municipalities in our region. The data there is for 2021 and 2022, which is the latest available data from our provincial FIR, Financial Information Return. And you can see that we're on the lower end of the scale, which is where we want to be. This tax arrears report is actually brought to committee annually in December. And so most of the report here is taken from that report, but it will be updated later on in a few months in December 2022, or December 2024, with updated information.
Any questions? Councillor Howe.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Director Z, can we, and certainly we don't name any, but the number of properties that are in arrears, like is it one property, is it 4 properties, is it 8 properties? And let me, one more follow-up. Back in some time ago, and it was not with this term of council, it was back a number of years ago, but there was always 1 or 2 or 3 that were always in that delinquent, shall we say, or in arrears. Are there perennial people in that? Number 3, you know, it's one thing with the dollar value. Nowadays with houses for, you know, $1 million, that those dollar numbers go up really fast. You know, is there any kind of a breakdown without identifying anything, so we can better understand if there is an issue with for people, is you kind of get a better idea of where it really comes to play, like who needs to be considered, who needs help.
Can I just summarize your questions? The first one was how many properties make up our tax arrears? So we'll start with that one.
Yeah, I don't have that number offhand, but we can certainly look into adding that into the upcoming report in December, if that's fine.
And then I think the second question was, are there any, yeah, we'll call them that, frequent flyers?
So we took a look at the aging, and about 75% is just from the past year, meaning that the remaining 25 would be from the previous year or earlier. So that, just to give you an idea. And we can include that in future versions of the report so we can see if that's increasing, decreasing.
If I could just add a question to that thought that you just shared with us. So we're looking at data at December 31st, 23, and you're saying that 75% of the 3,073,000 approximately has to do with the outstanding taxes for fiscal 2023. The remaining 25% then will be any of the years older than that. Yeah, so that suggestion, perhaps if the next time the report comes, you could give us a breakdown by the aging, that way would be very helpful. Member Scandinavo.
I think breaking down the aging would be helpful to figure out what's old, but it doesn't show frequent flyers as you're stating, so I don't know if we can extract that information.
And I guess that information, the name certainly, Councillor Howe said, will be confidential. I guess the concern is more about people who are frequent flyers, perennially in that position. We do have a policy, though, and we have staff. I believe one of them may be online with us whose job it is to follow those up. Would now be an appropriate time just to ask Ms. Martin to chime in and perhaps explain the process of how she follows these up? Are you with us, Lisa?
Yes.
Okay.
Happy,
Welcome.
Happy to speak to that. So, yes. So, although when you look at the arrears, it does indicate that there's 75% previous years. We do have a policy, and the province allows us to register properties that are in 2 years or more of arrears for tax sale proceedings. That doesn't mean they all go to tax sale, but it means that we are able to move forward and register properties and actually secure a lien on the property so that collection can take place. So a good significant value of those previous year arrears are registered. And so we have secured collection on them. So that's just kind of what I wanted to chime in and offer as an update. We pursue collection to as soon as they're able to be registered, we're moving forward. So we're managing those consistently.
If I could add a question to that, even before they get to that point where the properties can be registered by law, perhaps you could just share with us the work that you do to contact those ratepayers prior to that and leading up to that.
Sure. So prior to actual registration, so property owners are getting notices of their arrears in a consistent manner. So after due dates, and then at the beginning of the year, so when we look at properties at the beginning of January, we determine who is eligible and we reach out to them again with a notification to say, please contact us. We can offer payment plans. We can work with the property owners to make sure their arrears are settled. Prior to registration, they then would be sent subsequent to that a notice of what they farm debt or intent to realize on security. And following that period, 15 days after that notice, if there's no response, then collection would proceed. And so we do take a number of steps to try and work with property owners, ensure that they have options before they're registered. And registrations are fairly low consistently after those steps. So there's a lot of work that goes into it prior to actual registration. It's a very successful process, something that's not implemented as often as you would think, but it does assist municipalities significantly with collection.
Any questions from any of the committee members? I see none. Thank you very much, Ms. Martin, for that additional information. Any further questions on the tax arrears in general? Councillor Korsanji.
Thank you, through Chair. I think it's a great way to sort of see the health of our community. I'm just curious if and this would be a little bit more difficult, I'm sure, out of the realm, but numbers correlating with the food bank, because I'm wondering if people use the food bank to subsidize like paying bills and stuff like that. It would be hard to determine renters and stuff like that, but it might be something to consider, maybe partnering with them at their year end to see if the numbers correlate, if that is something that's happening, just to determine a more accurate viewpoint of, because it's easy to say everybody's paying their taxes and everybody's doing financially okay, but it is a little bit of a consideration if say we have homeowners that are using the food bank, and with the money they're saving, they're paying their taxes. It's not to say that they're necessarily doing okay, right? They're surviving, but I just think it might be an interesting correlation to see if the numbers of the food bank go up and the taxes. Obviously, the food hopefully would have like the difference between the people that rent and the people that own, but it might be an interesting correlation.
I'm going to let Mr. Delmonico chime in and perhaps just talk about privacy and confidentiality around our tax arrears and the names on there.
Yeah, certainly tax arrears is just one indicator of financial health. There's many others that could be looked at, and certainly there could be choices people have to make to when it comes down to it. And you're right, if we were to look into something like that, we'd have to look obviously at the privacy, making sure that there was very high level information, and if the food bank was willing to share that, I'm not sure, but yeah, definitely something that. Like I said, and one more indicator of financial health that could be looked at.
Yeah, I think even from the perspective of, I'll say GBF in town, they have privacy and confidentiality concerns that will guide them too as to how much they can share. And this is, and my second comment would be that this is property taxes for property owners. So if tenants were having a hard time paying their rent, for example, we would never know that, right? Because we are dealing only with the property owner, we don't collect anything from the tenants, right? Go ahead.
Thank you, through your chair. Just to clarify, the food bank every year puts out their numbers of households and stuff like that. So never would I ask specific names or stuff like that. They already have their generalized numbers to put out to the public of what the increase of households is and stuff like that. And they would know homeowners and that there are a lot of homeowners that are actually using the food bank. So I just thought it would be interesting just to take their generalized yearly numbers if there was a big increase, and then and just sort of compare the two in a full sort of picture. But yeah, thank you.
Councillor Vardy.
I just want to say that while that could be interesting, I'm not so sure it's statistically valid, or that the correlation, that there's exactly a correlation there. So I would be just a little hesitant. Just because two things happen at the same time doesn't mean that there's a relationship between the two of them. So I think somehow when you're looking at those kinds of questions, you have to be very careful how you structure them in advance of your data collection. With that, okay.
And I guess, originally, I'll just share my thinking as to why I thought this information in a tax arrears report was relevant, is that I think the healthiness of our outstanding taxes receivable is an indication of people's ability to pay. And I will say I take that as a guiding factor amongst many factors into consideration when we get into the budget, and then we look at what are we planning to do going forward, how much of an increase, right? So it's just one factor, I will say, that I personally take into account. Another one that Mr. Delmonico and I had been talking about last week was, the loan loss provisions that the banks have been adding to their balance sheets, meaning their allowance for uncollectible mortgages is really what they're talking about, and how the banks have been adding significantly to those provisions because they are expecting that as these mortgages are coming due in 25 and 26, they're going to have many of them that are going to have maybe using the word trouble renewing, but just where the mortgage balances are going to be higher because To use an example, they've been variable rate mortgages. People haven't been able to pay all the interest, and that's been added to the principal balance. And so I think all of the banks that carry house mortgages on them have been quite concerned about that too. So you're right, there's many pieces of financial information out there that we just need to keep an eye on to gauge what effect it's having on our residents. And yeah, the number of people at the food bank, what the banks are doing, what they're seeing in their mortgage portfolios, what we're seeing in our taxes receivable. And I'm sure if we think about it, there's probably half a dozen other indicators we could think of too that can help guide us in all of this. If there are no further questions about this report, then I will read the resolution that report Finance 24-23 on the tax arrears update dated August 22nd, 2024 be received for information. If I could have a mover for that to start with. Councillor Kristanji, a seconder, Councillor Howe, and by show of hands, all those in favor, that motion is carried. We will then move on to item number 8 on our agenda, which is our investment policy amendments. And so could I have a mover and seconder to get it on the floor for discussion? Member Scandinavo has moved and Councillor Vardy has seconded. So if we could move to Finance Report 24-24, we'll ask Mr. Delmonico to just lead us through that.
Thank you. This is in follow-up to last month's presentation and discussion on our investment policy. So we're recommending a few relatively minor updates. They're outlined in red in the policy. So one of the changes we're recommending is that a new appendix, Appendix B, be included in the investment policy, which spells out investment term limits. So one of our policy's primary objectives is to ensure liquidity is maintained. So to that end, we're recommending the implementation of limits on the length of an investment as it relates to our overall portfolio. So you'll see that per the new proposed limits, a minimum of 30% of our cash and portfolio investments should have a term to maturity of less than 1 year, whereas longer dated portfolio investments would be limited to maximums of 50% of the portfolio for maturities of more than 5 years out, and a maximum of 30% of the portfolio for investments with end dates more than 10 years out. We've also clarified the scope in the scope section of the investment policy that government business enterprises are outside of the scope of the policy. These types of investments are actually outside of the scope of portfolio investments when it comes to the Municipal Act as well. However, we have added an Appendix C to the policy just to outline our government business enterprise ownership structure and holdings. And the last matter I'd like to address is our ability to invest in equities with the One Investment Fund. Now, this isn't really an amendment. Our investment policy has always provided us with the ability to invest in equities, but in speaking with the One Fund, we need the bylaw in Appendix D passed to allow us to enter into an agency agreement with them to authorize that they can invest the funds on our behalf. So as part of the investment strategy update presented last month, it was suggested that 10 million of our roughly 80 million in cash and investments be invested in equities through the One Fund to help gain diversification benefits and opportunities for potentially higher overall returns. So for some background, the One Fund is a not-for-profit organization that was formed in 1993 by Local Authority Services and the Chums Financing Corporation, which is a subsidiary of the Municipal Finance Officers Association. So the focus of the One Fund is to provide investment options that support the needs of Ontario municipalities, and they manage $3.8 billion in portfolio holdings for over 170 Ontario municipalities. The One Fund's equity holdings are based on the Toronto Stock Exchange, so it's Canadian equities only. While it's based on the TSX, it does not mirror the TSX, so the fund is managed to reduce overexposure in areas where the TSX is heavily tilted, such as in financials and the resources sector. there's any questions related to those changes, be happy to take them.
Any questions from any members? Member Scandinavo, go ahead.
Tony, first of all, thank you very much for that report. Obviously, it's a big ask, and there was a lot to do there, and this was like very thoroughly laid out. So thank you very much for putting that together so quickly. I just had a couple of quick questions, and I think you answered some of them with your explanation. So we'll skip those ones. So I have a couple questions in particular about Appendix C, as it relates to like our, town-owned assets or like, non-traditional assets, let's call them. And in the report, it says that, the investment policy, kind of provided by the province, or the guidelines provided by the province and municipal act, doesn't relate to like town-owned assets. They relates more to the traditional style investments. So as a result of, these type assets not being part of, Section 25 or Chapter 25, I should say, does that that doesn't preclude us from having our own style policy on that, where we measure similar type, rates of return and similar styles, Sorry, I didn't think this question through so thoroughly, but it doesn't preclude us from having a similar style investment policy on town-owned assets, does it?
No, it doesn't. It just means we don't have to consider those when considering the portfolio investment policy, but you're right, it could be, that's obviously would be up to us.
Thank you. Follow-on question to that then, would it be wise to perhaps maybe consider something like that, whereby we can value or we can review the performance of these investments as we would review performance of other style investments?
Yeah, we can look at that. I guess the hard part there would be kind of what are you benchmarking against, right? You're benchmarking against the return on the investments. So I don't know if that would be fair, but yeah, that's we could possibly look into that.
I agreed. It's not as straightforward as, looking at the value of your TD stock and comparing it to other performers, but maybe just opening the floor on that sort of discussion. And then, again, thank you for Appendix C. It definitely brought forward that large asset that we have on our balance sheet with NPI. And I'm just curious, in Appendix C, you stated several different values. Are those book values or market values?
Yeah, good question. Those are book values. Those are taken from the financial statements.
Do we have any sort of understanding of the return on investment as it relates to both the book value and, more importantly, I guess, the market value as it stands today?
Yeah, I would say the market value information is not readily available to us. It might be worth it to have GPI perhaps come to a future meeting to outline some of this for us, if that might be the will of committee.
Councillor Vardy?
Thank you. We did have a valuation done a couple of years ago. So there is something available, although I think that would have to be updated in the current environment.
Go ahead. Any other questions?
No, I think we covered them all there. Sorry, my voice is loud.
That just came through with a big boom.
Yeah, sorry. Didn't mean to startle you there, but no, I appreciate that, Tony, and I appreciate the answers to my questions. I did have one last question on that equity proposal you brought forward. How does that relate to our relationship with CIBC? Would this be like an endeavor we would take via CIBC, or is this then managed separately and apart from CIBC?
Yeah, through the chair, thanks for the question. Yeah, no, this would be separate from CIBC. So one fund really is the only avenue if we wanted to partake in equity investments as a municipality. And so, yes, it would be totally separate from CIBC.
No, I think I'm good. No, I think I'm good for now. Thank you.
Any other committee members with questions? I think that Member Scandinavo raised a few points that I thought might be good just to clarify in Appendix C, that perhaps, and I'll start at the top, that you're quite right, the general ownership is that the town, we always say that the town owns 90%. It actually owns 23 common shares and 90 Class A pref shares, and a third outside party owns 10 Class B preference shares, and then Niagara Power owns 100% of Grimsby Power. And so I was thinking perhaps that would be an addendum that we could just add that in, that Niagara Power owns 100% of the common shares. And Mr. Delmonico, if you could look up the exact correct name. I don't know if they're called common or if they have another terminology, but just to clarify that part. And then under the latter half, or the latter third of the page, investment details, and all those numbers are as of December 31st, 2022. But we do have 2023 financial statements available. But I was going to say, so under the promissory note receivable, the amount issued, that actually is the original amount issued, and that is still the principal amount outstanding, even at December 31st, 2023. The common and preferred shares, where it says valued at 6.9 million, I think you clarified that already for Member Scandinavo. That actually is the recorded value on the balance sheet. That's not actually the valuation of those common shares. And then the retained earnings, again, that's what's recorded on the balance sheet, 5.9 million. That's not, as you pointed out, that's not the actual valuation of them. And then on the last point, I think it's important, and I realize this sounds like the accountants, but we talk about the net investment valued at 18.9 million. Again, that's not a valuation. That's the recorded value on the town's balance sheet. And that's because we have to follow CPA Canada's public sector accounting rules. And boy, do they make life interesting, so that the way we record our investment in them is we pick up our share of the net income. And again, it's not that easy because we only own 90% of Grimsby Power, so there is a calculation that goes into it, but it's basically done under what they call the modified equity basis. And so, again, it's not a valuation, and we don't, but that number changes every year on our balance sheet, and it basically changes by, I'll say, our share of the profit of these entities, less any dividends that we receive from them. And this year, they did declare a dividend again of $200,000, of which the town will receive $180,000. So this net investment, the promissory note receivable is actually on the town's books. That's a value that is on the town's balance sheet. The net investment, the very last one, 18.9 million, is a number that's actually on the town's balance sheet. But the common and preferred shares and the retained earnings, those are, I believe, just information you picked up from their financial statements of 2022. Is that correct? Perhaps we could just, make a few amendments to that so that there isn't any confusion ever as to valuation versus what's recorded in the accounting records. Member Scandinavo, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I more or less just maybe wanted a recap of like what we sort of agreed to or didn't agree to here. So obviously, Chair, you've identified some modifications to the document. I guess I was wondering, like, are we agreeing on like a new valuation? Are we agreeing on listing? Because right here, you've done a great job in highlighting, on the town of Grimsby's balance sheet what the value of this investment is, right? But we're not necessarily stacking that up against perhaps what the return on the investment is, which is the dividends, right? And perhaps if there's any sort of other intrinsic, return on investment that we'd like to highlight. And then are we going to consider, and again, I know you probably have 100,000 things on the go and, it doesn't have to be at the next meeting. I'm just talking in general to say, like, are we considering sort of a investment style policy, although we're not obligated to, but are we considering perhaps an investment policy related to assets of this nature? And maybe what are some of the criteria we want to use to gauge or monitor our return on this investment to ensure that the town of Grimsby is, benefiting to the level that it should, given the size of the investment?
Thank you. I think I'll let Councillor Howe go first, and then I'll just reiterate, though, that I think I'm hearing two questions. One is, should we work on having an investment policy for internally owned investments, like the one in Niagara Power / Grimsby Power? And then, so I'm hearing that as your first question, that would be something that we could work on. And then the second question that I was hearing was, just like we do with our outside investments, that we review the value and the return on investment and so on as well. Am I summarizing your thoughts correctly?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I ran on with that question, so thank you for paraphrasing it for me. But yes, those are my two general questions. But the second point, I don't necessarily think we need to wait to get an investment policy in place, because that could take time, right? And we really should think that through, to actually look at sort of the return on investment as it stands today, right? I think we could probably do that. Just it's some basic math that we could probably have, let's say, sooner rather than later. And then, sorry, there is a third question. The third question is, are we agreeing or not agreeing to potentially considering a market valuation of this asset?
I think I was thinking that was part of the second question, that there would be a market valuation, but I'll take that as a third one for sure. Councillor Howe, you have the floor.
I can dumb it down a lot further than that. I've got stocks. I know what the stock is worth. I can make my decisions. If I don't know what it's worth, how can I make any decisions on it? So.
Any other comments from committee members? I will add that, yes, both Councillor Vardy and I were on Niagara Power when we had a valuation done actually by Niagara Power, and trying to remember that particular year, and I'm going to say I think it was late in 2020 or early in 2021, somewhere in that time period, where the holding company went out and hired a firm, very knowledgeable in the field of local distribution companies in the hydro field. And they produced two reports, as I recall, for us. One was an actual valuation. What do these things sell for? How much is this particular one worth? And then a second report they produced, which really talked about the risks and challenges and strengths, weaknesses. I don't remember the exact title of the report, but I recall it was sort of a twofold report that way. And certainly that was a good, I'm going to say 4 years ago. So you're quite right. The world has changed. We've gone through a pandemic in that time period, and would probably be an excellent idea to have that brought up to date. Councillor Vardy, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a question, and it's really about, has anything changed in energy policy in those 4 years that might significantly impact that valuation? I don't know what the answer is. It's just a question, because I'm hearing that there's a lot of politics around the issue of energy. So just wondering if there's anything that would make the company more or less valuable in the current climate.
And I guess those are the things we don't know until we go out and get that report, right? I think when I think about an investment policy in this regards, I think that, to use the example that Councillor Howe used, and I think Councillor and Member Scandinavo too, that we don't know the market value of it because it's not a frequently traded commodity on a stock exchange. So the only way to do it, and it is possible, there are people who are skilled in this area, is to actually ask them to value it. And when I think about that, I think a really good thing is that at least once in every term of council, there should be a valuation of it, and we should relook at this. Not saying this is something that needs to be done on an annual basis, but certainly is worth at least looking on a regular basis, not necessarily every year, but to look at that. But I think we need a motion if we're going to suggest some of these things. So I'm going to ask the clerk to help that perhaps, let me try and word it for you, that it is the recommendation of the Finance Committee that a valuation be done of Grimsby Power. That's pretty short and sweet. Do we, and I think the really difficult part, and I give full kudos to the third-party company that also, and it's no surprise, it's Fortis, that owns part of Grimsby Power, but the last time we did that, they were extremely, I will say, well-mannered and cognizant of the fact that it was the holding company getting this valuation done, but that they obviously have an interest in this entity, right? And they totally stood down. I mean, they absented themselves purposely from meetings and said, we don't want to know. I mean, they are in the industry, know this information better than we do. And so they probably know way more than we do in this regard, and basically were very good and said, we have they basically said, we have a conflict of interest here and we will stand down in all of this, right? So the reason I'm sharing this is because it might be good to actually have this valuation done at the town level rather than at Niagara Power, so that we don't put Fortis in this situation. So it might be better to have town staff do it and present it, here than to try and stick handle through those other issues at that other company. But Councillor Vardy, go ahead.
Just for those who don't know, they have right of first refusal to buy it. So if they were to be involved in a valuation, lowball it, that's to their advantage, so they don't want to be complicit in something, so they're wanting to be completely independent for that reason.
Could you read that resolution back to us?
Yeah, through you, Chair, I've got resolved that the Finance Committee recommends staff complete evaluation of Grimsby Power. Just need a mover and seconder for that one.
I see Councillor Howe's hand up, but we'll take that as the mover, a seconder. Member Scandinavo, all those in favor by a show of hands, please. And that is carried. You did have a second thought there, though, that I didn't want to lose, and that had to do with developing an investment policy for internally owned investments like this investment, and the technical term is in a government business enterprise, but by that we really mean by our investment in Niagara Power and Grimsby Power. But that was kind of a second, your comments were, I think, that, the valuation really needs to be done first, and then as a follow-up, or simultaneously, we could work on developing an investment policy around that. Councillor Vardy had her hand up first, though, so on the second topic, I'll let her speak first, and then Member Scandinavo.
Yeah, I guess what I'm wondering, isn't this the only asset we have of this kind, like in terms of internal? So I'm wondering if a policy is really required to apply to one thing. Like, would it be easier we just discuss the one thing and make a decision? Do we need to have a policy about it? I don't want to create extra work, but maybe I could be off base, but.
Yeah, I suppose it's a good point. I'm definitely open to that thought. I think the only thing in my mind is to say that, what's the guiding principle and whether or not we think something has a good return on investment or not. Like, so the reason for a policy, in my opinion, would be to sit back and say, okay, you know, the valuation's been done. We understand what the return on investment is. You know, what do we stack this up against? And perhaps, like, I'm not even suggesting reinventing the wheel. Like, hydro companies and other sort of government business enterprises are probably owned by dozens of towns in cities across the province, right? So I can't imagine that we're the first people to think about this, to say, like, look, it's not part of the investment policy, but, you know, we could have some sort of tack-on policy where we evaluate other types of assets. So even just seeing what exists out there and in due time coming up with something. And again, just more or less to be able to measure what we find in the valuation with some sort of independence or some sort of, you know, some sort of measure that is other than just the folks at the table.
And if I could just add to that, and then I'll give the floor to Councillor Vardy. It doesn't mean we're contemplating selling. We're just contemplating a policy with some criteria in it that may highlight things for future committees and future councils so that they know perhaps when something's off the rails, right? That these are the guiding principles. They've done this examination. This is off the rails compared to what the policy is. Time to go back and look, right? So it's just to develop, I'll say, sometimes some criteria to evaluate it so you know when to take steps if you need to, right? Councillor Vardy?
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I would caution is that while we may find our ROI is low, it may be providing a benefit to the population that's tangible. So that would have to be taken into consideration, because if we don't do that, then looking at the ROI in isolation doesn't tell you the whole story of what you're thinking about.
Exactly, and I think that's why all those criteria need to be built into that policy, right? Member Scandinavo, I'll let you speak one last time, and then Councillor Howe.
Yeah, sorry, no, I completely agree. It's not just about the monetary ROI. There's other intrinsic benefits to having these sorts of assets. So it's putting that on a page to say, what do we value both, you know, tangibly and intangibly in these types of assets? What sort of benefits do they bring to the community? So, you know, having like evaluation done is one piece of it, but having a policy to determine how do we measure what the outcome of all these numbers are, or all this discussion is, to help guide, like, you know, a process of putting things back on the rails if it's off the rails, or whatever the case may be. So, but thank you, and your great points.
Councillor Howe.
If I can, just to kind of confuse it, not confuse it, but expand it a little bit more. We are doing a lot of work on asset management. Okay? Now, is that an asset for us? If so, how are we managing it, like, for the future? Is that our responsibility? And if so, that's a big number, I believe, on the asset side anyways, to look at it from that perspective. So just so we can better understand it from a true business perspective.
I've always said it's the third largest number on our balance sheet. So, you know, after our capital infrastructure being the biggest one, the second one now are investments, our external investments, and the third one being our investments here. Mr. Delmonico, would you like to add any thoughts to this conversation?
No, just that it's not really one of our capital assets. It's not, they have their own management team that's responsible for their own capital planning, but right, it is one of the biggest numbers on our balance sheet. And like Councillor Vardy said, there's much more than just financial considerations to be thought of in terms of whether it's something that's worth it to us. So we might need some clarity in terms of what you want to cover off in that policy, because it could be very broad in that sense.
Then to wrap up this conversation and this topic, Would anybody like to put forward a motion to develop an investment policy with respect to, I will say, our investment in government business enterprises, or to ask staff to work on an investment policy with respect to our GBEs, which is the acronym for Government Business Enterprises? Councillor Howe?
Through you, Chair, and if I can, I'm wondering if we're not a little bit premature with that. As Councillor Vardy said, we've only got one right now. Let's see what information we glean from that from our standpoint, and then tackle the policy. But let's see, it may not even be worth doing a policy. Who knows what's there, but just not dump something on staff at this point in time anyways.
Would it be appropriate then to amend that and to suggest that this policy will be developed by staff after the valuation is done? Certainly you can work on it in the meantime if you have time on the work schedule and can fit it in, but that it could be done after the valuation is done. Does that work with your workload and timing? Does that make sense to you, Mr. Delmonico?
Yeah, I think that valuation might help inform the policy.
Okay, I'll ask the clerk to read that back to us after much discussion. Go ahead, Katie.
I think I captured it, so just let me know. But through you, Chair, resolved that the Finance Committee recommends staff begin work on a development policy with respect to government business enterprises after the valuation of Grimsby Power has been completed.
I think it should say on an investment policy.
Oh, an investment
policy.
Development, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, on an investment policy. Could I have a mover for that? Councillor Howe? A seconder? Member Scandinavo? All those in favor by raising your hand, please. And that is carried. Thank you. Let me go back and find where I am now on the... there were some other investment policy changes, though, so we've really focused on Appendix C and so on, but I'll ask the clerk, have we really covered off? Do you need any more resolutions for us? Initially, the resolution was to accept the report, Finance 24-24, investment policy amendments dated August 22nd, 24 be received, that the committee recommends council approve the amended investment policy, Finance REV 003, attached as Appendix A, that the committee recommends council approve the draft bylaw attached as Appendix D to allow the town of Grimsby to enter into an agency agreement with respect to one investment, authorizing the treasurer to execute the necessary documents from time to time for that purpose. So
We've got the mover and seconder.
and we have the mover and seconder. Thank you. We had so much discussion since then. I was beginning to forget that. Any other questions just before I ask for the vote? Do we know how the one investment entity has done with their investments? Maybe if you could just add that one last comment, Mr. Delmonico.
Yeah, over the past 10 years, they've returned an average of 9% per year. But of course, past performance isn't indicative of future performance. So keep that in mind.
Past performance is not always indicative of the future, but the results of the past at least are good, is what you're telling us. Okay, then I will ask for a show of hands on the resolution. All those in favor by raising your hand, please. And that is carried. Thank you. The next discussion point under number 8 is the August update on the Peach King Center expansion. If I could have a mover and seconder to get it on the floor, please. Councillor Vardy has moved that. Councillor Howe has seconded that. And so I'm going to ask Mr. Delmonico just to walk us through that one.
Thank you. So good news to share. The tender package 3 has come in substantially under budget by about $1.8 million. And so that savings is more than covering some overages that we experienced in the earlier phases of the project. And it's also more than offsetting the change orders that have been approved so far for $449,000. So now, overall, total project, we're now projecting a surplus of 1.2 million. Now, the final construction tender package, package 4, has actually just closed a couple days ago. The budget for that package is 2.9 million. We don't know where that's come in yet. The bids are still in the process of being validated. But for the purposes of this forecast, we're assuming that package will come in on budget. We're also assuming furniture, fixtures, and equipment to come in on the budget of $600,000. And we're being conservative with our estimates, assuming that the full project contingency will be used up as well in this forecast. So these amounts will be updated in future reports as the actual costs continue to come in. And then we'll have clearer forecasts as we move along. If there's any questions.
Councillor Howe, you have the floor.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Director, it's pretty nice to see. Beats the heck out of some of the other projects that you hear about around the province, around the region. Kudos to everybody, even though it puts a bit of a lump in my throat, just being kind, but I'm going to emphasize your last, 2 paragraphs. Really, that's the change orders. Because you're absolutely right, in the report, everything's bought. Now it's got to be assembled, put together, put in the right place. Now the change orders start to show. And it can be an avalanche. So, keep placing it, keep hammering it, keep saying no to it.
Any other comments or questions from committee members? I'm not seeing any, so yes, it is a really good news story partway through this project. It is excellent news to hear. So I will, we have a mover and seconder. I have resolved that report Finance 24-24 on the Peach King Center expansion August update dated August 22nd, 2024 be received. All those in favor with a show of hands, please. And that is carried. Item 9 on our agenda has to do with correspondence, and we have none at this time. Yes, did I miss something? You are right. Yes, the agenda has 8.4 as Finance 24-25.
That is definitely an administrative error. I will make that change for the minutes so that it is 24-25.
You caught a typing error there, thank you. Yes, so that was the approval of Finance 24-25, just for everyone, on the Peach King Center expansion August update. Item 9, correspondence, we have none. Item 10, other business. We had added an item on there which had to do with the release of the agenda and reports. Mr. Delmonico, maybe you could just give us an update on where we're at looking at all of that.
Yeah, through the chair, if I could turn it over to the clerk for some comments.
Through you, Chair. So the Office of the Clerk is bringing a report to Council in September, which is reviewing the procedural bylaw, just a midterm review of it. This will also include the timing of agenda publication as well.
I think we tried really hard this time, and we got it out on Monday rather than Tuesday, so we took baby steps forward. We just need to take a really big step now and try and get it out on Friday, but Councillor Howe, did you want to add to that?
No, I don't want to add to that, but the director gave us a note or with an explanation, and I'll speak for Member Thompson, because at the last meeting, he asked about a budget survey, and that budget survey is up on Let's Talk, and it was going to expire at the end of this month. You've extended it into September 8th. there's certainly a chance or an opportunity for someone, if they want to say something, by all means, say something. My say is it possible, and then I'm just thinking about, and I don't have a young family at home anymore, but that first week of September used to be just jam-packed full of a whole lot of things that didn't allow you to kind of get your head around the everyday business of running a household. You got the kids, meet the teachers, et cetera, et cetera. Is it possible that we could extend it out a little bit further than the 8th, Director?
Yeah, sure, that's possible. We could extend it farther. There's a budget kind of kickoff set for the report set for the end of September. We're hoping to have some information from the survey by then, but we could incorporate results to date. So that wouldn't be a problem to extend it.
That's a good suggestion, and if you're able to do it, that would be great. Any other business to come forward from anyone? Seeing none, then we were trying to conduct a survey, I guess, to move the date of the next meeting from, I believe it was set for the 26th, but we have a delegation coming and they're not able to make it at that time. So we were looking to move the meeting to October 3rd. And our clerk's department was trying to coordinate all of that. Does it look like at this point that works for everybody? So just to note then, the next meeting will be on Thursday, October 3rd at 6 p.m. And if there are no other items, then we will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Have a good one.
You too, gang.